Hello. Hello, I'm Karen Jenkins-Johnson, principal at Jenkins-Johnson Gallery in San Francisco and New York. Thank you for joining us. My team and I hope that you're healthy, safe, and well during these very challenging times. We welcome you to our 19th Conversations on Culture, a discussion during the COVID-19 pandemic with artists, curators, and collectors on current art world topics. Today, I'm over the moon to be in conversation with 8 of the 10 invited artists from our curated exhibition, Justice, at the Marin Contemporary Museum of Art in Novato, California, otherwise known as Marin MoCA. The exhibition includes artworks by 10 Bay Area artists of color, along with a national juried exhibition. I will be in conversation with 8 of the artists: Wesaam Al-Badry, Nyame Brown, Dewey Crumpler, Erica Deeman, Rodney Ewing, Mildred Howard, Lava Thomas, and Louis Watts. 2 of the 10 artists, Woody Diothello and Rashad Newsom, are not able to be with us today. The words "liberty and justice for all." These are the closing words of America's Pledge of Allegiance. When I was a little girl in grade school, every morning in every classroom at my school in Portland, Oregon, and most of the classrooms throughout the United States, students would stand up, face the American flag, place our hand over our heart, and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. We did it because that's what we were taught. That was our patriotic duty to our country. Unfortunately, our country has fallen short of the promise, liberty and justice for all. I am hopeful, and I stress hopeful, that with the new President-elect Joe Biden and the first female and biracial vice president, Bay Area's own Kamala Harris, we can bring us together as a nation to re-examine the meaning of the words, America, land of the free. As a nation, we must eliminate racism in all forms. Artists can lead us as they investigate themes and imagery showing errors of the past while lighting the path forward. The exhibition Justice explores racial inequality and the need for social justice in our nation. The Bay Area has long supported political, environmental, and social issues and LGBTQ rights. My curatorial objective for the exhibition was to invite Bay Area artists of color whose art practice reflects the local and national issues of our time, and for the national call to select artworks from across disciplines that include themes of immigration, separation of families, Black Lives Matters, COVID-19, women's rights, and police brutality. I hope Justice evokes a positive discussion on diverse issues impacting our society today. Before I introduce the artists, I want to thank Nancy Rakoff, Executive Director of Marin MoCA, and her team for inviting me to curate Justice, as well as galleries, Anglin Trimble Gallery, Anthony Meyer Fine Arts, Jessica Silverman, and Rena Branson. While I introduce the 8 artists, we'll present a slide presentation of the exhibition. The artists have many accomplishments, distinguished awards, and have exhibited in major museums, exhibitions around the globe. Time does not allow me to mention all of them. This is truly a renowned group of artists. Please be patient with me while I introduce this fantastic group. Wesaam Al-Badry. Wesaam is an investigative multimedia journalist, interdisciplinary artist, working mainly with themes related to identity, labor, migration, Islamophobia, war, and technology. He was born in southern Iraq and came to America as a refugee. Wesaam has a master's in journalism from the University of Berkeley and a BFA from San Francisco Art Institute. Louis, do you mind turning off your volume or your mute?
Is that
And
me?
yeah, Dewey, could you turn your, could the panelists mute their, there we go. Wesaam has a master, excuse me, Wesaam has a master's degree in journalism from UC Berkeley and a BFA from San Francisco Art Institute. He's represented by Jenkins-Johnson Gallery. Nyame Brown. Nyame's multimedia paintings explore the intermingling of African-American pop culture and the larger African diaspora. He's currently a faculty member at the Oakland School of the Arts. Brown has a BFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and an MFA from Yale University. Dewey Crumpler, an associate professor of painting at the Art Institute of Chicago. His work examines, in this particular show, examines globalization and cultural co-modification through the integration of digital imagery and traditional painting techniques. He has a BFA from San Francisco Art Institute, MA, San Francisco State University, MFA, Mills College. He has an upcoming 15-year survey at Richmond Arts Center. He's represented by Jenkins-Johnson Gallery. Fourth, we have Erica Deeman. Erica, hey, raise your hand, please. Yeah, Erica, she's a photographer, fine art portrait artist that depicts Black identity through a narrative of larger-than-life portraits. She received her BFA in photography from the Academy of Art University. She's represented by Anthony Meyer, Fine Arts. Rodney Ewing is an interdisciplinary artist whose work explores identity, narrative, history, space displacement, physical vulnerability, and violence. He has a BFA in printmaking from Louisiana State University and an MFA from West Virginia University. Mildred Howard, Mildred, hey, began working in the visual arts. She was a dancer. I'm sorry, before she began working in the visual arts, she was a dancer. Her background can often be seen stylistically in her various works with an understanding of the movement of the human body interpreted with an air of modernism. Known for her sculptural installations and mixed media works, Mildred transforms objects of everyday life into subjects of historical significance. She was honored with a doctorate of fine arts from the San Francisco Art Institute. Mildred is represented by Anglem Trimble Gallery. She is very much loved here, and I'm so honored to have you, Mildred. Lava Thomas. Lava, can you wave, please? Lava. Also, ooh, this woman is something else, as you will find out later in the show. She doesn't let anybody mess with her. Lava uses an intricate approach to art that includes drawing, painting, sculpture, and site-specific installations to address social issues of race, gender, and representation. She often draws from her familiar Southern roots, African-American protest traditions, and other current socio-political events to bring awareness and empowerment in the face of erasure, trauma, and oppression. Lava received a BFA from California College of the Arts. She is represented by one of the oldest galleries here in the city, Rena Branston Gallery. Finally, Louis Watts. Louis, okay, is a photographer, activist, and curator. He embodies a cultural landscape in his lifestyle photographs, primarily centered around communities occupied by people of African descent. His work reflects an interest in both historical and contemporary representations of the African diaspora. Louis is a professor emeritus of art at UC Santa Cruz. Louis has a BA from UC Berkeley, an MA in photography as well, photography and design from UC Berkeley. He's represented also by Rena Branston. There will be a Q&A at the end of the conversation, so please send us questions via the Q&A button. Also join in the chat during the conversation. So, in the words of Martin Luther King, we're going to stand up, and speak out. Thank you all for being patient with me during this long introduction, but I hope you find it very informative about all these renowned, wonderful contemporary artists. First, I'd like to discuss the broad theme of justice. What does justice mean to you as an artist at the dawn of the 21st century? Rodney, can we start with you?
Yes, thank you for hosting this event. And I think justice means to me, it's the same thing it's always meant to me, balance. There has to be a balance within society, has to be a balance within culture. Culture has to come first before any man's laws can be instituted. So justice for me is about that balance between being a human, being a citizen on this planet, and being able to carry out the best wishes and the best of us to our fellow human beings.
Anybody just want to join in? Since I wanted to make sure that we get Rodney involved because he's going to be leaving us a little earlier. So Rodney, thank you so much for that. Mildred? And you all can just join in here. You can just join in here. There's 8 of you, so just hop on in. Just pretend like we're sitting in a circle, or we're at a living room, or just hanging out. I'm sorry, I don't have a drink to offer you today, but
rain check.
Huh? Rain check. That's right. So so please just jump in, and because justice, I think right now is just so important to what's happening in the world around us, and lack thereof of justice. And you guys here are very well informed and have various opinions, and I think they're also vital. We have so many people here today to hear you. So Mildred, I'm gonna hand this off to you right now.
All right, well, just us. Mm-hmm. In the larger scope of things, just us does not include people like me or people who are speaking today. But for me, justice means a level playing field. And I mean, across all spectrums of this society, a level playing field in terms of economics, education, living, all of those things. And especially for those people who are invisible. And all of us know those who are invisible, whether it's a young African-American male or a woman or part of the LGBTQ. Those are the things those are the ones who become invisible. So when justice for all, it didn't mean justice for me. And I think that it's now that time that we all seize the time and seize the moment, because it may not last but for a minute. And I think about that on one term, but on the other term, and on the other side, the flip side of that is we're not going back. And all of us who are artists express our work through what we see in society today. So it is up to us to tell the truth.
The term you use, invisible, what actually really struck something with me, because for me, justice is giving a voice and a face, allowing people to be both in the sort of playing field, but also allowing them to tell their own story. And I think that's maybe something we do as artists to help people to do, to sort of give them visibility, to give them the opportunity to have a voice and an appearance. So for me, that's, especially in this context, that's how I'm interpreting justice.
Well, right, Lou, and artists are chronicles of history, mm-hmm. and of the moment.
Yep, both. And also future possibilities. I think it's past, present, and future for sure.
Dewey, come on, man. We know you got something to say. Unmute your button.
I think of justice in the Einsteinian sense, and justice is relative, and it depends on where you are in relationship to that trolley car of justice. If you have money, you can run at the speed of light with light. But if you don't have money, then you are standing still while you hear justice rumble loudly because it's right near you, and you hear it move away very swiftly, lightly in the distance, because money and power determine justice. And as long as you live in America, justice will function within that beam of light. Where are you within it? And because I have stood for 71 years in relationship to justice, I see it come and go, and particularly in the arts. The arts and justice have never hung out together. The arts have always operated in relationship to power, and therefore art serves power. And that, like the speed of light, is not going to change.
Well, we hope it will. We hope that we take step forwards. And I think we have to have people out there having conversations to help it change in the arts. Because if we don't have those difficult conversations, it's not going to change. And we have to challenge, and we have to pursue and force, not force, but we really have to demand change. And we can't do it quietly. We can't be politically correct. We have to make people feel uncomfortable, because without people deciding that they're going to expand their mind and change, we will stay the same.
Now,
Go ahead.
Can I say something about that? Because that reminds me of Frederick Douglass, who paraphrased Newton. And that is, power concedes nothing but to a demand. It never has, and it never will. And in that way, just like the speed of light that Newton initially articulated and Einstein revealed, that the light, as Martin Luther King said, bends towards justice if the gravity of activity and movement forces it to do so. And so your point is well taken. Unless you apply gravity, you are never going to move anywhere, just as Black people and some visionary folks a few days ago applied gravity to a psychosis that brought it to its knees, and it is struggling to maintain itself, but the constancy will make it leave on the 20th of January. And in that way, your point, Karen, is so well taken. That is pressure. Gravity is the point. Constant, persistent, even though as we have lived through these periods, and we know quite distinctively that every time a Black body is brought to the ground by gravity, some sense of change emerges. But it always takes Black death. And in that way, We have to work diligently to change that dynamic. And that's the one, for me, that remains constant. And it's the one that we have to be clear and vigilant on every moment. And that means everybody who believes in justice.
That's what I'm talking about. You know, give me prime property, my 40 acres in prime property in any city in the United States of America. That's what I'm talking about.
Right on, Mildred.
That'll be justice.
It's like you mentioned just us. It's like, I think that in some ways for me, that's part of getting to justice, is like in some ways connecting more, connecting globally, like Africans, like people of the African diaspora connecting like globally. And really examining that idea as being a force, because I think as a global force, you could apply the pressure. You could apply pressure to nations and tell them, like, you know, you need to examine like these issues that are happening in your country. If we work as a group collective, like in people of the African diaspora, that to me, like that just us, like that's it, because it's like that's the group that is concerned, is like us as a global body, whether you Afro Latino, Afro Alaskan, Afro Asian, it's like being able to connect on a global level. I think that allows for more power for us to be seen and also to exert power. So that's, and what you're talking about is that's the gravitational pull, because when we talk about the force of Black bodies, I mean, even thinking about the election, brown folks showed up, they came out, they made it happen, and still was only a fraction, you know? So I think about, again, as a global force, like Pan-African connections, you know, again, that being a place, because we could then talk about what justice really is for us, because we could talk about the particularities, you know, the specifics, you know, as it is in Martinique, as it is in North America, as it is in Brazil, you know, and apply the pressure that needs to be applied. But I think as just kind of moments, blasts like here and there, it's trickier. It's much trickier, you know? And I think as I think about it in the future, the thing that's positive for me is that the idea of people really examining justice, examining the structure, the authoritative system, whether it's the prison system, like looking at like the depth of like how many Black folks are in there, people of color, and yeah, like laying out films, documentaries, letting people realize like, look, man, we need to really look at this system and examine it and restructure it. Because without that, like the statue of justice, it'll be blind always, unless there is a restructuring, it seems like to me.
Well, even when I think about the statue and the justice and the scales that are being held, I always think about, well, who is holding the scales? And therein lies the answer. You know, when the scales are not being held by us, then there's an imbalance, and therefore justice is never delivered. But the future is of us holding the scales, and then we have justice. We have our own justice, just us, and there we are. And kind of really thinking about that, the idea that, you know, history has taught us that when we have our autonomy, then we can deliver justice. And that this system that we live in is not delivering, and it never has delivered on a universal level. And so kind of banding together, having that international nature, the ideological space of Blackness gives us strength in our own justice.
Well, thank you all. That was something. How do you find that the current society and political environment right now is impacting your practice as well as you? Lava?
Both the current political climate, well, the political climate for the last 4 years, let's say that, starting with Trump being elected president in 2016. Going back to that moment, it had a profound effect on my practice, looking at the resurgence of hate crimes against Black people, people of color, non-WASP folks, looking at the resurgence of white nationalism, looking at just the blatant expressions of racism and misogyny. So when Trump was elected, I started looking at the civil rights movement and looking at our collective organized power to shift the balance of justice. I looked at Black women who were both the foundation, the backbone, and at the forefront of the civil rights movement, but whose stories remained unvoiced because the civil rights movement was a very male-centric movement, and the folks that got the most attention, you know, Martin Luther King and a few others. So that moment in history had a profound effect on my practice. Yes. Thanks for showing that. So this is Cora McCaney, one of the women who organized the Montgomery bus boycott. And these women are not generally known when you talk about the history of the civil rights movement. So I was really looking at this also from a Black feminist perspective, which is really important because, again, Black women, you think about this election, Black women overwhelmingly voted for Biden. Black women are breaking the glass ceiling in government with Kamala Harris as the vice president-elect. You look at Georgia and you look at Stacey Abrams and a few others, Black women who are responsible for getting the vote out for Biden. So, and that effort started years ago. So I've been really interested in centering the leadership and the labor of Black women in the political battles that we have fought both historically and in the present.
I'm absolutely. You are absolutely on time as usual, Lava. But I'd just like to say that over 80% of Black males voted to get this beast out of office too. So
Yes.
I want to say that thank goodness if we were led by Black women, or we were of course, we've all been shaped by Black women, but my point is that fortunately, we got up off our rears as well to join that heroic effort led by Black women, as you've articulated, in all periods. So.
I don't want to start anything, but it's also true that Trump got the largest percentage of the Black vote of any Republican in the last multiple generations. So, it's a complicated, diverse.
Mostly men.
Yeah, maybe, yes.
Yeah.
But it sort of talks about his power as a kind of reality TV leader. That's what his real kind of genius is. That's about his only genius. It is interesting that it's complicated, and the idea of justice is complicated too. The other thing I was going to say quickly was that you mentioned Frederick Douglass, and talking about kind of rules of physics and light. He, not too long after the invention of photography, saw the power of media, and we all know he was like the most photographed human being in the 19th century. He did that, and W.E. Du Bois mounted some exhibits in Paris during the Paris Exposition. And the idea of kind of visual representation as a kind of vehicle of both power and justice is something what this exhibit's about. So I just wanted to point that out.
Bending light. Bending light, my
Yep.
brother.
That's it.
I would like to, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Wesaam.
Because I wanted to absorb all that wisdom. Like I have two things to make. I have a complicated relationship with justice because I'm always critical of who's selling justice and who can afford justice, not buying, but affording justice. Because, you know, like my mother homeland was colonized by the French, then my father, you know, land was colonized by the British, right? And this whole idea of justice saving us, you know, saving your homeland from the savage, which is you know, and these perpetual like justification of justice throughout history, right? It's like it's either Africa, the Middle East, you know, like anywhere those countries can't. And it's a Western concept and Western thing, right? We never were part of the conversation. What is justice? Like it was never like a roundtable discussion. It was like, here's justice, here's the stick, you accept it or you lose a limb. So then we look at it in a contemporary sense today, and that's where my work picks on like, you know, the migrant workers or the farm workers, justice skipped them, or justice took a short nap, you know, like it literally forgot about these folks. And you know, on these laws, we live in this, so like California is considered to be this liberal state and all of that. Farm workers don't make like a bin of 400 pounds of tangerines or pomegranate, whatever. It's only $40 to $50 they make. Now you take that and, you know, and a lot of these laws in California come from plantation and slave owners, you know, so the history continues, you know, over time pay. So, and that's the work, and it's not only in like, you know, like in the Central Coast or in Central Valley. This is across that, you know, and like, I mean, we can't go on. So I'm very scared. I'm not scared in like, I'm very like always questioning like who, you know, what is justice? Are you selling me this idea? You know, like it's a pyramid scheme. It literally like, and the only way for it to really be, it have to be from the people, by the, you know what I mean? Like the ground, the people within our own communities, because that's the only way we can mobilize and make change. But if you're talking about a suit and a tie, you know, I'm like, no, it just complicates things. And the other thing is, with my practice, I'm not a US citizen, and I refused to get my citizenship during Trump because I did not want to be associated on my citizenship with this demagogue. Like he's all, you know, like
Absolutely.
and I can't.
Yeah,
That's my
so
way
with you.
resist it as an artist. I was like, no, you know, I'm gonna wait. And it doesn't like, you know, and I'm always like, it doesn't matter who's in office. I'm always like, what's their policies toward like Africa, the Middle East, and the rest of the world. It doesn't matter if it's like Biden is coming in as the president, but like, I was like, what are you, you know, we might see change in America, and that's a lot of time we see, but what about globally? Like the United States, and like have a military base in every other country in the world. So I want you to like people to understand that like, it's like a new form of colonization, right? Like, because that's the only way for us. So I'll leave it right there. You know, so that's why, but I have plenty of work to cover during Trump because he's doing a lot of, you know, wrongs, and I don't see any rights in the meantime with him, and he needs to go. I mean, you know, like
You know, I have to say about my good friend.
Going.
Wesaam, yeah, really, that it has been said that he, with his background, has been able to go to places like South Dakota and photograph the native culture and photograph in Hunters Point, and all because of his background that gives him this incredible empathy as an artist, be absolutely accepted and be able to render things in a way that other people have not been able to do. And I think that on some level, that's the other side of the coin he's talking about, that his experience has given him that ability, that insight, and that perception, which is kind of universal. So the idea of colonialism being well, it's a two-way street for sure, but it also, at its very best, and in an effort to sort of become visible, here's a prime example of someone who's been able to have an incredible ability to sort of make visible conditions as he did in this exhibit. And I just need to shout that out because it's
Mhm.
really exciting.
Thank
And glad
And
that he,
I would like to add, like, I'm a fan of everybody's work. Like Erica's work to me is like the empowerment of beautiful, you know, because we have this thing of a history of us looking weak or pathetic on the other end of the lens, right? But we're beautiful. Like we can speak for ourselves. You know what I mean? Like if you look at throughout the history of Life magazine, you know, when Gordon Parks did the riots in Detroit,
Mhm.
you know, they didn't like that caption. You know what I mean? They're like, no. But that's the thing, is like in today's, like, we can control the narrative, you know what I mean? And conversations with Dewey in the past is like, you know, back then you're all only that you do this type of genre of art, you know, you only either do this and you stick to that. But today everything changed, and I think a lot of the folks on here paved the way for the younger generation to come in and be flexible or able to, you know, to be interdisciplinary artists. So
Mhm.
thank you all.
Erica?
Yeah, no, thank you, Wesaam. You know, I am totally with you in terms of not wanting to become a citizen under Trump. You know, I was in that place where, you know, I was wanting to vote, but there was a part of me that didn't want to be part of this system, and also, you know, kind of give up so many of my rights, including my ability to leave the country if I needed to leave the country, because I think that we are in that place and in that point of danger in terms of a second term under this person. So, but you know, for me, I really wanted to think about bringing, you know, a visual justice to the Black body, and thinking about the history of the photograph and how it had denigrated us, and kind of coming back with something that really could respond to that, and creating spaces that provided safety, and spaces that were places of sharing and of learning. And I think much of that has come from not being from this country and coming here as a Black person, and a kind of understanding this cultural difference and climate. And that isn't to say that racism does not exist in the UK. And, you know, I very much see that Brexit was this kind of introduction to the era of Donald Trump, and kind of seeing how my fellow Brits kind of voted for this out of xenophobia, out of racism. Kind of, I understood that this could equally happen in this country, and I think I was one of the only people in my group, in my cohort, that really, you know, was convinced that he was actually going to get the first term. But kind of coming here, I understood this need for community and for Black community, and it's something that was different in the UK, and also just different in the intensity of violence. You know, violence happens in the UK, but it's, you know, over here, it's, you know, it's an absolute beast. And my work has provided me, and I have been granted, you know, such wonderful conversations and connections with many of the people that I've worked with. And, you know, being able to kind of talk about my experiences and kind of share experiences has been so grounding for me, and something that I really cherish, you know, in all of the work, and being able to share that with so many people in person as well, kind of working exclusively in the Bay Area.
Rodney, how has the current situation impacted your practice?
It has sort of created this intersection between the work I've always been concerned with. I've always been concerned with the stories, our stories that don't get told or aren't allowed to be told, and coming up with different mechanisms to tell these stories, and then just an immediacy. There, I usually kind of roll slowly into topics and sort of think about them over long periods of time, but Recently, I've been able to respond to things with a quickness and almost a just this release that I had to have, especially with the videos that came out last spring. Seeing Ahmaud Arbery being run down like that and shot, and the look on that cop's face as he's kneeling on George Floyd's neck, and there was something about that just like, you have to say something now. So thank you for putting this work up. And yeah, so again, I'm always trying to figure out how can we get our stories told. How do I reach that audience that would rather not think about our stories? And with this body of work that's on the screen right now, Fact and Fiction, it was, I realized that people are in love with fictional stories. They embrace these characters and these stories, and they hold these stories closer to their hearts much more than they do of the events that are actually occurring right in front of them and happening to other people. And so just trying to incorporate these fiction-based stories to retell the stories of a Henrietta Lack through through a quote from Milton's Paradise Lost. And it's and also with the pandemic, it's I've been able to sit with the issues and with the work and figure out how I need to move forward. So yeah, it's all these things. It's the intersection of time and space. It's the intersection of the events happening. It's my older work, or my thesis. A lot of my theses are coming together, and it's just downright angry. Just I'm tired of seeing people that look like us having to look over their shoulders constantly, and watch how they move, and also not being able to tell the generation behind me, like, this is what you need to do to survive, because I don't know anymore, because that playing field, that line keeps getting longer and longer and longer.
Well, you had talked about what some people jokingly call Blaxit at one conversation. It's instead of Brexit, it's Blaxit, Black people leaving the United States for another country. Did you consider doing that, Rodney?
Definitely. Just for a mental health break, but then it's also part of me that, for lack of a better word, screw them. I'm not going to be run out of my home. This is my ancestral home. For all intents and purposes, this is where generations of people in my family have paid taxes, put down roots, have been responsible citizens, and to sort of turn my back and sort of, if maybe it's an ego thing, but to let them win, to let them to say that, like, there's always that slur that that white supremacists like to use, like, go back to Africa, go back to where you came. If you don't like this country, then leave. And there's part of me that's like, no, I'm gonna be right here. You're gonna have to deal with me every day. And you're gonna have to figure a way to navigate around me rather than me navigate around you.
Well, thank you so much, Rodney, for that. That was very visceral, and I know that it's difficult being a Black person in this country, because I've been it for 60 years, but being a Black male, I think in particular, is even more difficult. And I feel you. I want to shift a little bit here, and everybody here is primarily living in the Bay Area now, and so Mildred, you've been here for a while. So how's living in the Bay Area community influenced your work? And you all can jump in too, please.
I think living in the Bay Area presents several issues. On the one hand, it's thought to be extremely liberal. But on the other hand, it's very polarizing. And I've been through several movements and like Dewey and like Lou in this area. But what I've found is that out of the Bay Area, from the civil rights movement to the war in Vietnam, to the war in Iraq, now, and the Black Lives Matter, the Black Panther Party, all of those have contributed to what forms my work. And I have to say that I have to do a shout out to the Black Lives Matter, because the world saw this, the world, and colonization did a job on the world, especially those of us who have just a hint of melanin in our skin. And there's no going back. The road is difficult, but there's no going back. And I feel that my voice comes through my work. It's my freedom of speech.
Can you
And
tell us about this body of work here, the work that you do in justice?
I was given a stack of Black newspapers that were done in the Tribune, that was printed in Los Angeles, but it covered all of California and parts of the United States. And at one point, that is how African Americans got their information. But this series that I began in 2014, it speaks to the young people of today. And in some ways, they remind me of the 60s and the 70s when I was coming up. And at the same time, their dress, the way they phrase their words in their music, all of that is on the backbones of those who came before us. Mm-hmm. So this work that you're seeing is attributed to those aspects of life. It's called the Millennials and the XYZ Project. I had a summit where I met with 9 young people, and I wanted them to be in a place where they felt comfortable in talking about their concerns, because they are the future. And I consider part of the Black Lives Movement part of that generation. And yes, they talked about some of the same issues that we're talking about now that happened. But you know what? It's no going, like I said before, it's no going back. When you look at the number of young people who were on the streets, mm-hmm. whether it was Hong Kong, Bristol, Europe, the world knows, because we now have the internet. We didn't have that before. We had to wait to read it in the newspaper or maybe see it on the 6 o'clock news. But it's no going back. It's no going back. And I think much of this is up to the younger generation to take this and run with it.
I was going to say, I was going to talk a little bit about my picture of Angela that actually was commissioned by a museum in Dresden for an exhibit that's up now, although the museum just closed because of the spiking in Europe. But the exhibit's called "A Million Roses for Angela Davis." And it's partly sort of just to celebrate her, but also it's for the fact that in the 70s, there in East Germany, which Dresden was a part of, there was an incredible campaign of postcards and letters and articles working to try to free Angela, who was in prison. Mm-hmm. And so originally they wanted me to photograph some of her speeches, but they were canceled. So I was able to, I taught with her, but she's hard to get a hold of, but I was able to convince her to meet me in downtown Oakland, where these incredible murals have sprung up. And I thought this photograph, which is in the exhibit here in Marin, I thought sort of represented both her present in terms of the mask and kind of conditions, but then this incredible mural, which represents certainly an element of her past, and the fact that the pictures in this image is taken in Oakland, where she has a lot of history. And I think that I like that idea of kind of connecting the past, her past as a symbol, her present, and also even kind of, I think something in her stance, which says something about her resolve and optimism for the future. And so it's one of those things where, you know, I had a little bit of time, and when I downloaded, I went, oh, did I blow this? But I actually have made 3 or 4 pictures that I'm really proud of, and I'm really happy that this one is in the exhibit in Marin. So that was, I just wanted to talk about that while I have a chance. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to come back to that for just a second, but I want to say goodbye to Rodney. Rodney has to head out, and I also want to wish Rodney happy birthday.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Rodney.
Happy birthday, Rodney.
Birthday, Rodney.
Birthday.
Right on. Right on.
We appreciate it. He's got to get back to teaching, but we wish there are some questions, Rodney, in here too that we're just not going to get to right now because you got to go unless you want to answer one before you leave.
Let's see. The kids aren't going anywhere. They're on Zoom, so they're a captive audience.
Okay, let me see the question here. I've got to find it because it's not in the Q&A. I apologize. Oh my goodness. Does anybody see it? Oh, it is in the Q&A. Can anybody, oh, Rodney, do you see him taking a stand here in, as MLK said, integrating into a burning house? Do you see using other spaces to retreat, specifically to the motherland, to heal and restore as an overall strategy, and not to escape, but as another way to continue to be in this violent place?
I think any space that we create, whether it's leaving a country where you're being oppressed and going someplace else, or within that country or that city or neighborhood itself, and finding a space where you and people with you know, or kindred spirits can go and find solace is a strategy. It's a great strategy. So yeah, and I think we all at times need to have that peace, that space where we can retreat and gather our thoughts, gather our strength. So whether it's like, if you have the ability to leave the country and do those things and come back, great. If you know, if you just need to go over your friend's house and sit down and then have them hold space for you, then then these are all, you know, relevant survival techniques. All right.
Thank you, man. Have a happy birthday.
All right, thank y'all.
All right. Louis, I'm sorry I had to interrupt you, but I wanted to catch him before he left. Now, you've been in the Bay Area for a long time as well, and you've actually taught at UC Santa Cruz. You went to school here at UC Berkeley, you know, and you've also photographed a lot here, and you've lived actually in Marin County. So, you know, how has working here influenced what you've done as well? You're mute. You're mute.
Like my fellow panel member, Mr. Crumpler, I have Arkansas roots, and I actually was brought up on the West Coast, but I was born in Little Rock because my father was discharged from the Army in Fort Lewis, and he's from Atlanta, and he was ambled into Seattle and got a job with the Urban League, not planning to. And so he sent for my mother. I was conceived in Seattle, but she went to Little Rock because she knew the doctors there. And so when I was growing up, every 2 or 3 years, we would drive to the South to see the grandparents. And I sort of something that's informed my work was probably when I was 6 or 7, I was sitting in my grandfather's tailor and noticed on the street where it was that there were storefront churches. There were people talking stuff in the barbershops. And I said to my mother, I said, so do you mean that all this going on is not just limited to the central area of Seattle. And my mother said, well, you know, it had to come from somewhere. And that was kind of, that sort of comment has informed almost all of my work, that the idea of culture and experience traveling, being altered in some ways, but also having its certain roots. And it's something I have photographed in both the West Coast. I photographed a lot in Harlem. I photographed in South Central Los Angeles, and I photographed in places like in Cuba and Jamaica, and in the Black sort of presence in Europe, in France especially, and in London. And so that kind of has informed my work. And I'm also really interested in kind of how images read. This picture was taken during the Black Joy Parade in Oakland, which as soon as I heard was happening, I knew I had to photograph, because it kind of fit into a series of portraits that I've done. And I would say that the pictures of Angela also do the same thing. They kind of reflect, this is kind of another variation on the idea about the past and present. This is in front of the Oakland City Hall, and how, you know, as Angela being a symbol, sort of universal and over a long period of time, and the Black Lives Matter sort of bringing that, connecting sort of her activism to something that's more contemporary. And I thought that I mean, that was a picture I had to do. So I guess I would say it was a couple of things. I have my Fillmore t-shirt. That's another project I've worked on, which was a book called Harlem of the West, which was about a neighborhood that I didn't know anything about, although someone took me to when I first moved to the Bay Area on a Friday night when it was jumping. And it was an African-American community that sprang up because there weren't a lot of Black people in San Francisco, especially before World War II. But as part of the migration that sort of has in the middle of the 20th century, the one place there was housing was what had been Japantown, the Western Addition. And so immediately, because it was an entertainment area, people brought with them their musical tastes, their religious beliefs, and that all happened right in the middle of San Francisco. And then it was almost immediately, there were efforts to make that go away with redevelopment, and it actually succeeded in the late 60s. So the book is kind of about found images of this, literally this history that was erased. And it certainly has its roots in kind of my interest and my background. So that's, I would say, what's interesting about the Bay Area is true, is it does have this really liberal tradition, and I think it is in terms of the voting and everything. It's a blue area, but it's not quite as liberal as it claims, and progressive, with a lot of history and even things going on now. So as you've heard, with people being you know, called out for barbecuing on Lake Merritt, and sort of trying to be in their houses, that just like everywhere else, it's complicated. And you know, well, this picture I love because I think it's pretty self-explanatory. And it's also another example of someone expressing and using their own voice to express a really important notion. That's I guess I would say all that relates to both my background and kind of what I'm hoping to do in both now and in the future. And what I've been doing during the pandemic is staying at home and looking at my archive, and having that both reinterpreting older work, but also having that influence kind of work I'm doing now.
Right. And Nyame, thank you, Louis. Nyame.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, you know, that Louis says it. I'm actually looking at probably a little bit of a couple of things were happening, I think, during the Trump getting elected, like the first 4 years, was actually looking at re-examining older work, being a little upset, and then creating work that was responding to being kind of, I guess, being upset. Like, how do you respond to it? And I think couple things was like, I think some of the work made me think a lot about the importance of the Black imagination, and thinking a lot about it in terms of it being an impetus for all kinds of ways of being or thinking that couldn't be achieved if you didn't engage it. And so, but also too, thinking a lot about it being a treasure trove, like having to go inside, like diving inside and building these kind of really intricate kind of worlds, because what was kind of happening outside was so volatile, so like intense. And so, and also too was also, I think there at the time was a public speaker that spoke about the idea of African Americans needing to engage imagination a bit more, because for a long time we've been using almost like a proletariat thinking, like workhorse thinking, not so thinking of things in the moment and not thinking about giving yourself that moment of kind of fancy to think about other possibilities. So I think that there were some things that were happening during that time period of thinking about that when Trump was kind of in early stages of kind of Trump being in office. But thinking about, yeah, like the Black imagination being a really needing to be engaged, because when it is, it's like so many possibilities that could start to happen that you couldn't entertain. So I think for me, that going inward was one thing that kind of happened during that time period. And I would say, and shifting like to thinking about a little bit more about like being here in the Bay Area, and I think this links to the idea of imagination is, you know, the Bay Area is a really, really interesting place because people mentioning a lot the idea of like the Southern influence. It's like the train routes, you know, it's like it goes straight up from Louisiana. You know, that's where my family's roots are, from Louisiana. And then my mother is from New York. So I have this experience of going from West Coast to New York and then down to Louisiana. So it's like, and all of them are these interesting Black experiences, all very different, you know? And there's this real, of course, I think on the West Coast, we get, there's this funk element, you know, and then in the South, there's this like traditional element, you know, and then in the East Coast, this idea of like what's popping, what's the new, where's the cutting edge, but there's still a core traditional root, or there's a celebration of the Black expression, like this real root of its expression. And I feel like a lot of that collides with my work, and the imagination is a way to kind of engage that. And so I think this, coming from the West Coast, it's like I want to kind of mix all those kind of things together, you know, with the work. I'm thinking about like how powerful the imagination can be, you know, and part of it being at the nexus of all those three different regional experiences of Black person, because they're all so different. You know, it's like going to Louisiana, walking on tar roads versus being in San Francisco, when it was a lot of Black folks there, when Phil Mo was Phil Mo. You know, it's like you go down there to go see, you know, the Black rodeo riders, you know, and it's like that. And then going to New York, where you're seeing like, you know, you're seeing Broadway, 42nd Street, you know, you're up in Harlem, you're up in the Bronx on 161st Street. They're all really very interesting kind of experiences. I think that all kind of come mashed together in this, and kind of come together in this imaginative expression of Blackness, and thinking about the different ways it can be, different ways it could totally be, you know.
Thank you, Nyame. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Sure.
I think it's important too, when you talked about imagination and just your own world that you've created within your artwork is nice to discuss that. But I want to get to just a couple of things here before we go to Q&A. We've got quite a few questions and we don't have a lot of time. I would like to talk about artwork here in the Bay Area, what it's like being a Black artist in general, and particularly I'd like Lava to address what she's been dealing with and for the last year and a half, and how that has impacted you as an artist and has caused change. Thank you.
Yes. So here in the Bay Area likes to think of itself as a progressive, forward-thinking place. Someone mentioned that we are California is a blue state. The Bay Area is particularly blue, and people like to think of themselves, non-Black people like to think of themselves as allies of Black and brown people here, and think of themselves as working to make this place equitable. Okay, that's sort of the general idea. Last, I guess it was August, my proposal to honor Dr. Maya Angelou was chosen by a selection panel that was made up of a number of people, but that had a critical mass of Black women, artists and arts professionals for the first time in San Francisco's history to select an artist to honor a Black woman. Now in San Francisco, there are over 80 monuments to men, primarily white men, only 3 monuments to women and no monuments to Black women. So my proposal was selected, and I chose this form. It's not a statue. I chose this form because this rectangular form is based on the Benin bronzes of West Africa. It's also based on Elizabeth Catlett's monument to Ralph Ellison, which is a rectangular form. And I was really trying to get away from this statue. I was trying to get away from a European aesthetic of statuary that we see in Confederate and colonial monuments. So my piece was selected by a panel, and then an elected official 2 weeks later said, no, we want a statue. And she demanded that the project be closed. She essentially perpetuated the erasure of Black women's labor, Black women's creative labor and expertise, and said that she wanted Maya Angelou to be honored in the same way that men have been elevated in the city. Now we're talking about white men here. So for someone like Maya Angelou, who represents, for me and for many artists, like this idea of creative freedom, she was so many things and she was so ahead of her time in so many ways. To constrain her in a 19th century form, essentially, but not only that, the word statue in the legislation that created this was crossed out and artwork was in its place. So all of the information that we were given as panelists, I followed. And then this supervisor after the fact came in and shut everything down. That my monument, after a year and some odd months, was just approved in early November after the Bay Area community, not just the Bay Area community, I mean, the Bay Area arts community was outraged, okay? It was covered in the press. We attended meetings. I worked with See Black Women to organize and mobilize artists, not just in the Bay Area, but around the country. Black women artists were incensed. We had no voice in how one of the most celebrated Black women of our time was to be represented. And when this idea was being bandied about before the legislation even was written, there wasn't a Black woman with the requisite expertise in the room. So you had white feminist liberals dictating how a Black woman was going to be represented in the public realm. And then we were invited after the fact to participate. And then when it wasn't a statue, another white woman liberal comes in and says no and shuts everything down. We were not having it. We were not having it. And so after a year of, when you talk about bending the light, when you talk about pressure, it took a year of pressure, letter writings, mobilizing, grassroots organizing, and the other things that came into focus and came into bear that I would not have anticipated. Black Lives Matter, toppling monuments, not just in San Francisco, but all over the country, really looking at this European aesthetics to think about how we represent Black people and having the imagination to think of something different. That was one thing. the other thing was the pandemic had us all home. So in the same way that we are all gathered here from different places, people around the country could attend the Visual Arts Committee meetings, could attend the San Francisco Arts Full Commissions meetings in a way that we couldn't do before. So all of a sudden there were not only eyes on them, and the Arts Commission had been able to rescind contracts, just to do everything without eyes on them before, because you had to physically be in the building to attend the meetings and to make them accountable. So I received an apology. I received an apology from the Arts Commission. I received an apology from the supervisor. I received an apology from the mayor. That quote from Frederick Douglass, that power concedes nothing without demands, it never has and it never will. That is so true. And I can't begin to express how important community is. So disparate communities coalesced in this case to not just to support me, but to support artists in general, so that our voices, and arts professionals too, so that our voices and our expertise would be heard and respected. So a year and some months later, my proposal was finally approved, and I'm grateful to everyone who stood in solidarity with me. I'm grateful to everyone who showed up to make the Arts Commission and San Francisco government accountable, so that they couldn't just slide this under the rug, because they tried to reissue a new RFQ, choose another artist. You know, they had even gotten to the point of choosing the semifinalist, but we were not having it. And it speaks to, when you talk about justice, you know, Maya Angelou was many things. Foremost, she was a champion for justice. So it really speaks to the enduring power of her legacy and the power of community. You know, now that we are sheltering in place, we can't gather. I think about some of the gatherings that we've had where all of us talked about it. There was Soul of a Nation celebration, opening celebration, where it was discussed. There were many openings, art openings, where this conversation was happening. So yeah, justice, it was a long time coming, and thank you, Mildred.
Right on.
Because Mildred was right there with me.
Well, you know, freedom's not free.
Freedom is
Never.
not free.
Not free.
But there's no going back. There is no going back.
No going back.
No going back.
So you guys, I want to go to the Q&A here. And if there's something before we go to the Q&A, anybody wants to say, Erica or Wesaam, or wants to say about the, you know, what it's like working here in the Bay Area, please do so, because I do have one last question before we go to Q&A. Is, do you feel that the institutions are supportive of you as artists in the Bay Area? I just want to touch upon that. Marin, MoCA, with this exhibition, I think is leading the way for not just in a big way. And I don't want to say it, but I'm going to let you all say it. Go ahead and talk about this, because it's something that I get hot on the collar about.
I would like to, can you hear me? So practicing in the Bay, I moved here from the Midwest, you know, it used to be 3 of us or 4 of us on the corner protesting wars. And now you come to the Bay and there's like thousands of people, you know. I remember it was like me, Charles Holm, and Ben Jones in Nebraska trying to protest the Iraq war, and we getting flipped off the whole time, you know. Then you come to the Bay and you get introduced to a lot of, you know, other organizations. Like, you know, when I first moved here, Black Seed was a Black queer women movement, you know. They were like doing a lot of work. Then the like Black Life was, you know, here, and like a lot of other things. But at the same time, it's like the Bay, as liberal as it seems, right? it's not. There's like double standards, right? Like,
Mhm.
who can be and what can be, and like, you know, I always say if it's beautiful this way, just look the other way and you're gonna see something else. And I think that's the thing we forget sometimes is that you know, people are struggling. There is a lot of struggle in the Bay, even though that. And two, institutions. I mean, you know, going to that, like I think journalism is more supportive because at the same time, a lot of these institutions in the Bay, they're not ready to see the Muslim or the Arab in any other way. You know, they have painted in their mind. You know, if like if you don't make oppressed art, they're really not interested, right? Because they're still like stuck to these ideas. You know, of a Muslim or an Arab have to be oppressed for them to get their work. But you know, none of us are oppressed, even though we went through hard times and a lot of struggles. You know, people are resilient and we rise up above that, and that does not define us. And I'm not like trying to make a plea, but I'm trying to say to a lot of these curators and directors, like you got to check yourself and check the way you view other people, you know, because you're still looking at like curators from the 60s and 50s and 40s and 70s, how they collected work. But there's a whole new generation of new curators, and I think they're breaking boundaries and like they're trying to bring change. So I think, you know, it's a very tricky situation when it comes to like Arab or Muslim artists being like viewed or collected in America, because it's still like we have to be in that, you know, in that little pigeonhole, on the little box they put us in. So.
Louis? Louis?
I think it's been said. I would say the one, well, there's a couple of things I think about. Like I think about my parents and my grandparents who had to overcome a lot more than we do. We have some things. We're resting on their shoulders. We're standing on their shoulders, and I think there's some ways that it's it's easier for us, or there's more opportunities. And I think there's even more opportunities for the generations ahead of us, behind us. But I think it's important, well, to not lose sight of what has happened before. And I think that's what's important. That's important, but also to take advantage of those things. That the one thing that's happening in a lot of art establishments is that people who sort of continued with their behavior are now starting to be called on it. You're hearing trustees of institutions are having to leave, heads of institutions. That's what happened at the Cantor, who have not, you know, have been able to get away with murder, and they're being called on it. And I think I would say the Black Lives Matter and that generation has been sort of at the forefront of that. And I guess I would say it's, you have to sort of stay on guard, but you can't sort of rely on victimization, because I think we've moved, you can't go back, and we've moved past that. And I think you need to use that power and, you know, seek truth to power for sure, because I think that's really important. And if we don't do it, who will? And I think that's the one thing about this exhibit. This is a prime example of the voices, the artists of color being, you know, the curator, the artist, and the artwork all relates to a particular moment now. And I think that's why it was important. I mentioned earlier that I lived in Marin for like 25 years. And when I moved 20 years ago, I completely messed up Marin's demographics, which I'm happy to do. But you know, it's an interesting place, a place I felt comfortable with and had some opportunities. I was able to both teach there and use that as the basis for work. And I'm really happy that it's the venue for this exhibit. I think that's really important. And I think it's great that you are there and that you are, again, sort of connecting to an institution where you live, Karen, because it's important. It has to happen everywhere. Nobody gets a pass because of where they are.
Well, thank you. So Nancy Rakoff, actually the executive director of the Marin MoCA, has a question. She says, how can museums help educate the public about the injustices faced by people of color? What should be done in elementary art education programs? Who wants to take that?
You know, I work as an educator. I teach at ninth grade. I saw an article yesterday that was called, you know, I guess using education as activism, you know, and so I think that there's a way that it can be used, like I guess very directly that way. But I think part of it is just introducing a curriculum that steers away from being so Western Western canon art based. I think that's it, and just even introducing other art practices that again just come from various other cultures, because there's hope there too, because I was looking at the California state standards, and they actually allow for a lot of openness for teachers to do that, to expand compared to what they were, let's say maybe I would say even like 5 years ago, which was very like much based on the Western canon. So I think those are places that are really, really good. I think that you can affect kind of change in those places in education, as far as like, again, like decentralizing your curriculum, making sure you're talking about contemporary artists of color. You know, I used Lava in a video presentation not long ago, just showcasing her work and talking specifically also about her battle for the public art piece specifically. And sure, again, because a woman artist, a woman of color, someone that's a Bay Area artist, really powerful artist, but also too engaging in public art and the ups and downs of that, relating to what Lava expanded on earlier, you know, all of the kind of the hurdles that she encountered. So I think that is a place where one could start to kind of do that, you know. It's a lot of work decentralizing your curriculum, but it's worth the work, because again, what you're doing is you're just opening someone else up to much more possibilities as they kind of grow in their life as being a student.
So talking about students, so there's one here. How do you as artists think that we can be most effective in getting more young people of color impassioned and more knowledgeable about art created by artists of color?
I was going to say, when I taught at Berkeley, especially, and at Santa Cruz, I had to talk to the parents of a number of students that had come to school who wanted to major in art. And especially if they're the first person in their family to go to college, that was sort of like a horror, there was sort of that was not a responsibility, and in terms of, aspiring for something. And I was not always successful, but I did say, at this particular moment, if you are good at what you do, the world is your oyster. That really is true. If you are, and I think that that's true, and I've seen it in terms of people that kind of really were able to, both because they had support from their families, but also in some cases when they didn't, if they really put their mind to it and were inspired by the idea of having their own voice and the voices and the narrative of experiences that they didn't see in the canon, that really has been exciting. And the example of that is both this exhibit and a lot of sort of exciting work that's being created right now. And I think it's one of those things where the work has to be made, and the makers have to be encouraged by having opportunities. And I think those opportunities do exist. And I think we all, as established artists, have to make sure that those opportunities continue to expand. And I think Lava's example, and I don't know if that would have happened with Lava even a generation ago, that it would have been much more difficult, but she really was able to marshal people that were really of that consciousness, because of Black Lives Matter, and sort of just people are not having it. And I think, and there's power in that passion.
Well, we're going to wrap it up here. I just want to say, ask you guys if you have any final comments to make. Erica, I know you're temporary up in Seattle. We miss you here. Do you have anybody have any comments about anything about the exhibition Justice, or what's anything else about your practice? Any words of encouragement from young artists? Anything?
Yes, I mean, I think I wanted to kind of come back to the question about art and young people. And I think that if we can think about how we can redefine what art is and how it's seen, then I think that is going to open up opportunities and an engagement. I mean, if you think that art can only be seen in a museum in this white space, you know, these spaces have never been traditionally safe for Black people or created for Black people. So with that in mind, I think if we can just broaden that horizon and think about what art can be, you know, art can be getting dressed every morning. You know, that is art in itself. And so kind of redefining it might open the door. But yeah, I mean, I just want to say how grateful I am to kind of be in conversation with you all and kind of sitting here listening to everyone talk. I'm like reminded that I'm actually on this panel because I'm just so engrossed in what everyone has to say and really the legacy and the wealth and generosity of the Black art scene in the Bay Area. And I desperately miss you all, even though we're here together on the screen. But there is something about being in a place in person. And I think that we all miss that right now. And when I think about my practice, you know, so much of my practice relies on being in commune with other people, in collaboration. And without that, you know, it makes you realize how much you rely on that person to person connection. And so, so I really hope that we can all be in commune together in the near future.
I would like to add is that funding is important for young artists. You know, like having access, you know, to transportation to see, you know, shows. I believe you shouldn't have a Black or a collective of Black and brown artists, you know, show every 10 years, you know, so you know, there should be a lot so young people can see people they can relate to. School curriculums like in high school and even middle school should be introduced to a lot of these artists right now on the panel, so you know somebody that, you know, looks like you, you know, have a lot of the themes you have in mind you can relate to, and you should be educated. And even in college, right, like, you know, you shouldn't be struggling like a lot of times, you know, who can afford to go to our schools, right? Like you have to have, you know, and a lot of, you know, Black folks or brown folks can't really afford school, right? Like you want to, when you leave school, you want to have a girl, and schools should step up and, you know, offer grants or scholarships to keep students, you know, not only for their education, but only for housing, you know. So we need to, so it should be like a whole like campus, you know, like it should take care of all your needs while you're in school, because a lot of artists that, you know, there's a lot of example of a lot of fantastic artists that had to leave because they couldn't afford it. And, you know, and art is not, you know, art is expensive, you know, to get a degree, to get these degrees and pile up that. And I think there should be a lot for young people to help them. And if we're gonna, you know, if we're talking about change, we can start right now. You know, if anybody wants to help, you know, apply, donate to something that you believe in, to send a young kid to school, like, you know. So I would like to leave it there.
I think mentorship, you know, I mean, that's one thing I'm always amazed by. I think a lot about Kerry James Marshall talking about his relationship with Charles White, you know, and I think Terry Atkins talked about his relationship too. I think Aaron Douglas. So again, it's really, I think that mentorship is awesome. Like getting like young artists of color in your studio, have them work and see what you're doing. That's golden, because we don't have those opportunities. And you have to wait till you get to art school to see what's going on. And then that, by then, it's not that it's late, but it's also, it's not tailored to you the same way that if you're having that experience, you know? And where I see connections between older and younger African-American artists, I see a lot of strength, you know? I'll say even looking at Mildred and Lava, always amazed at that connection, always, because it glows. It's not even, it's just like it glows, and it's a powerful one. So I think that mentorship, and then also pedagogy, man. Pedagogy is the key. We just talked about that. Inserting these things into your curriculum, artists of color. The community of artists that all of you will be in my next presentations. So I think it's like pulling on the people that are there. So you don't got to look through art history books. The contemporary artists are the people we're talking to right now here on this panel. So I think using ourselves as resources, you know, it's like, it seems like it's hard work looking outside, but really we're right here. So pedagogy, mentorship, for sure.
I think that we also need to change the face of the academic world. Right now, in the universities, Dewey, you teach at the San Francisco Art Institute. Who else like you teaches there? Is there one Black woman professor?
No, of course not. No.
And that's across the country.
Yeah.
Right.
Across the country, Black and brown people are not represented in the academic world, and the in the art world, in the academic world, and in the art world. And what I think, go ahead, Dewey.
Well, part of the reason you do not have museums and other places of power relate to people of color is because the pedagogy that was inculcated into young people throughout the 20th century, who have now become, many of them, curators, have been trained pedagogically through that Eurocentric filter, and therefore they don't have ongoing relationships with people of color because they've been shaped in a particular way educationally, and so they don't see or understand why Lava or you or any of the other people on these panels or anywhere else make the kind of work they make or the way they think. And so that drives how people come to experience works of art. And until that pedagogical structure is reshaped, we are going to be at war on this throughout much of the 21st century. I'm somewhat pessimistic, given my 45 years of teaching in higher education, and traveling all over the country and knowing that in almost most of the universities in the country, there are only one or two African Americans teaching in any of these institutions, and only more recently have they emerged. So I agree with Wesaam and a few other people that in the pipeline are some extraordinary warriors, I call them, because they have extraordinary and difficult work to do, trying to bend this historical curve that has happened in the West as the demographic shifts. And that's 72 million people who voted for Donald Trump are under no circumstances going to fade. They are going to get bigger. So the war, the fight, is really going to be much more serious as we move forward. So I think we need to keep that in mind, because that also is going to impact those museums. The money, as more people of color wind up in museums, museums are going to change. The environment is going to change. And those 72 million are fearful. But that other 78 million that are out there who are broad in their understanding, those are the ones who are going to have to join together to operate against that 72, which are not going to be acquiescing at all. So I have a very different concept about what the future is. It is going to, like the last 45 or 50 years, be in struggle. It's going to be in struggle. So that's my sense of it.
I just wanted to say, I saw the show earlier this week, and I would strongly recommend anybody that can get to Marin to go see it, because it's really powerful as a physical presence. So that I just want to do that as a parting gesture, and really good on you, Karen.
Well,
Thanks much for such
Yeah,
an
thank you.
extraordinary thing,
Yeah, thank you,
Karen.
Karen.
Your vision
Thank you.
and seriousness about change, which certainly brought me to you because I could sense your powerful belief in change, a light bender you are.
That's a
Thank you
great way to
so
describe
much.
it.
Thank you. I'm going to, it's been my pleasure, my joy to talk with you all today. I'd like to say namaste to you, and I wish you all a happy Thanksgiving and happy holidays, and be well and safe out there.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Be well
Thank
and
you.
safe, everyone.
Thank you.
Everybody,
Bye-bye.
you guys have a great break. Take care, y'all.